Damn, R.I.P. Lee Scratch Perry. I'll be paying more direct respects to that guy later in this series. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about album number 5 from The Orb, Cydonia. Alright, now here's one I'd been pretty excited to talk about. This is a pretty interesting point in The Orb's catalog, mainly because it's widely considered to be a career killer of sorts. The official point at which their classic period was over, and they'd never see the same success they saw for their previous classics again. A critical and commercial flop, to which it seemed to be agreed upon at the time, showed The Orb past their peak and no longer relevant. And at the same time, if you've been watching this channel for long enough, you'd also know that I gave this album a spot in my favorite albums of all time list back in 2016, and have praised it pretty much every time I've been given the opportunity. I've never truly understood the hate for this one. I think it's just as good as the stuff from their classic period, albeit maybe for different reasons, and delivers on what I always saw to be a lot of the core appeal of The Orb in general. It's legit one of my biggest personal favorites in their whole catalog. I've been sitting with this one for a minute, mulling over what led this album to have the reputation that it did. And there are some shifts in direction here that I can see having been a turnoff to their audience in 2001. There's a ton of parallels that can be drawn between this album and the album that Orbital came out with the exact same year, the Altogether. Even if I personally love both of these albums and feel they don't remotely deserve the reputation they got, at the time of their release, both signaled the end of each artist's respective popular relevance. A turn for something a lot more lighthearted and goofy on average, with several moments that had a much more polished pop sheen to them. I can see how that especially would have been a turnoff in the early 2000s, in the era where it was ridiculously uncool to give props to anything pop-leaning, just a few years before, say, Liz Phair would ruin her career by going pop and seeing all the backlash for that. Also, probably didn't help that in the eyes of many contemporary critics, that the rave movement they came out of itself was old hat and now to be left in the past. The harshest review I saw of this album basically boiled down to, oh, this kind of electronic music isn't cool anymore. Go give up on your careers. But I obviously don't take much stock in that kind of perspective. Now, the Altogether and Cydonia aren't exact one-to-one equivalents for their respective artists. The Altogether was a lot more off-brand for Orbital. It was a pretty radical shift away from their usual formulas and felt like a specific effort to make something that sounded really crazy and all over the place. And the pop moments, as good as they still are, did maybe kind of feel like a label concession that the brothers themselves weren't particularly thrilled to be making. Cydonia wasn't nearly as much of a risky move or off-brand for The Orb. It followed their traditional sound and style a lot more closely. The much goofier flares to this album were instead, putting this aspect of their sound to the forefront that was always there to begin with. I mean, Dr. Alex has always been a giant goofball from the very beginning, right from the days when he'd named their breakout single a huge ever-growing pulsating brain that rules from the center of the ultra world. This may have been why critics at the time felt like The Orb were, behind the times by leaning even further into their more lighthearted side. No one felt like they were especially changing their ways. They were just losing the relevance, I suppose. On top of that, while one could theoretically write off the poppier moments on this album like Once More in Centuries as label concessions, I don't think Patterson had any major resentments towards making stuff like this. Not just because these kinds of poppier cuts would continue to show up on several later Orb albums, all the way up to present day, long after there'd be any kind of label pressure to do so, but also one interview I read seems to give me the impression that he was actually trying to preempt the label when he put them together, expecting they'd want that anyway and figuring he'd have fun with it in the process. And then he ended up getting burned by the label, who sort of shelved it for a few years thanks to the label itself getting restructured and stuff. Most of the album was actually recorded way back in 1998. There was a whole different version that leaked on Napster, and they'd even end up getting dropped from the label anyway shortly after this project dropped. So that was fun. Also, Andy Hughes, who handled a pretty decent chunk of the production on here, ended up leaving the band right after this. Yeah, this thing had pretty troubled development and a load of cooks in the kitchen, also featuring credits from Simon Phillips, Guy Pratt, Thomas Fellman, Phil Egonadek, John Room, and many others. I won't deny the album is maybe a little bit of a mess, but I still contend that the messier aspects of the album actually do more to add to its charm rather than take away from it. It's still well structured and flows really well and doesn't feel like a product of cynicism. When I first heard this album, I had no idea about its reputation or production and just happened to gravitate towards it because its lighthearted sense of goofiness played into what I saw as one of the wilder and more creative entrants into the Orb catalog. May as well go into the track listing itself. The album starts with the obvious pop single, Once More. I can see how putting on an Orb album and being immediately treated to the super polished, quirky, trip-hop instrumental, bright melodic flares, and obviously present female vocals could be a turnoff to people who didn't want the Orb to go pop. But not gonna lie, this track has always been one of my biggest favorite Orb tracks, just in general. I think the tune itself is great, catchy without being annoying. Aki Amori's vocals are really airy and laid back and bring the perfect emotional resonance to this cut. It's not the most indicative of openers, but I don't feel like one track can really effectively let you know what you're getting into with the album as a whole. At the end of the day, it does work great as like an attention grabber and really puts me in the right sort of mood to enjoy the rest of the project and explore its various light and breezy expanses. Once More really does put me in a good mood like few other Orb tracks can. But the album starts to show more of its true colors by the time second track, Promis, rolls around. And now we're exploring the much stranger and more alien-sounding worlds that I'd hoped for out of an Orb project, with some instrumental flares like honking clarinet rhythms, various horn and flute stabs, and those samples of orchestral string flourishes, going up against the buzzing bass and cascading break beats. It feels like I'm exploring some kind of ancient Egyptian temple, like the pyramid that's balancing on the seal's nose there. And it just sounds absolutely freaking gorgeous. And it segues perfectly into Ghostdancing, which combines all the spacious sounds of the previous track and implements them into this plodding but haunting trip-hop cut featuring lots of airy vocals from Nina Walsh, who honestly sounds kinda Bjork-esque here. Maybe not as obviously distinct a voice, but just something about the tone of her voice kinda reminds me of Bjork, I don't know. It's a great effect either way, and the way her voice echoes around all those ghostly synth bleeps and whooshes in the background, it sounds fantastic. We then get one of the less interesting moments in Turn It Down. This one never really stuck out to me back in the day, and I did used to think it kind of meandered a long time without sounding as distinct. But it also has been a definite grower during my listens leading up to this review. There's not as much focus on, like, brighter melodic flares here, but there is a pretty propulsive groove being built out of this one. A lot of clanking and metallic noises going into this one that give it, I guess, a more robotic but futuristic sort of sheen to it. Even aided by the little voice snippets from narrators being implemented occasionally. And even if it is tonally different from what came before, it does flow particularly seamlessly out of the previous track. I still don't know if it's one of my biggest favorites from here, but it is still a really solid track all the same, and I think it speaks to how highly I view this album when that's technically one of the lower points. Also a good marker of how highly I view this album is the fact that the following two tracks, both really short interludes, are also kinda low-key favorites of mine. Egnable is probably the single goofiest track the Orb have ever created. You get this guy trying and failing to describe a program in which either you learn a new language of your choice or reupholster your furniture. It's kind of hard to tell. And the guy like runs into technical difficulties, talks to someone off mic, reads out complete broken English nonsense, all entirely over this carnival music organ backdrop. It's just such a gigantic out-of-left-field mindfuck, and it's followed by another out-of-left-field mindfuck interlude immediately after it called Firestar, which is like 46 seconds of a bunch of random disconnected sound effects, and then one admittedly pretty badass techno groove in the middle. This pair of tracks always used to freaking fascinate me in high school. I'd often put on the album specifically for these two interludes because I loved how goddamn weird and goofy they sounded, and how they delivered such instantly memorable ideas in such a short amount of time. And I still love them now. Though I suppose recently I have started to think it was maybe a bit of a dick move for Egnable, the least dignified orb track of all time, to be the final track in the orb catalog to feature a credit from Chris Weston. The CD credits it as being a leftover from the sessions for the collaboration album they did with Robert Fripp called FFWD, which we'll get to more later in this album's track listing. But whatever, I still don't think the album would have resonated with me as much as it did without these goofy-ass interludes thrown in. They are very much part and parcel of the experience for me. Going back to the meteor tracks, next up we got A Mile-Long Lump of Lard, which may be fairly simple in its construction, but is legit epic anyway. All these awesome build-ups of synth progressions and breakbeats just piling on top of each other, all the drums eventually getting this really fuzzy, distorted quality to them, and it's like this track is destroying itself from the inside out. It's one of the loudest and most kick-ass moments on the project. Maybe it doesn't bang as much as, say, Toxygen or Montandior, but it comes close, despite having much less melody and a lot more of like a weirder experimental edge to it. That's a definite highlight on here. But after a moment like that, we gotta tone things back down, so we have Centuries, the other vocal pop cut featuring Akiamori. Well, it's actually not nearly as pop-friendly as Once More. It feels a lot more free-flowing and atmospheric than that. All these mysterious and formless but enveloping and welcoming synth pads, and one delicate clapping drum beat. Even Amori's vocals don't have as strong a hook behind them and just kind of float all around. Well, it isn't not catchy, just less catchy or poppy compared to Once More. And after a news bulletin announcing someone had their house made upside down, we get another similar vocal cut in Plum Island with Nina Walsh. This one's much sparser and more mysterious sounding. Most of it is just Walsh's voice going over a really quiet and simple beat, a loop of sub-bass and a few flute riffs from James Clancy, but still manages to form a pretty solid, catchy hook out of everything. If this track's like being on some distant, isolated island, it's one covered in like this dreamy, mystic fog where it's hard to see where you are. It's a pretty neat effect. And it leads quite nicely into the even dreamier Hamlet of Kings featuring Guy Pratt, which combines a tapping drum beat and lo-fi loop of some guy going doo 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 with all these warm and formless synth pads and expansive harps. Got a decent bit of evolution over time, deeper synth bass lines and more synthetic beats get introduced alongside some squirty acid effects, occasional distance choir samples, field recordings of birds, other brightly melodies, even a little bit of DJ scratching, and none of it feels out of place. This is a pretty underrated cut if you ask me. Really exemplifies the most laid-back and soothing aspects of the entire album and pretty consistently holds my attention. After this we get one more interlude called 111, which is significantly less interesting than the other two interludes here. Just one simple echoing drum beat and some squirting effects that's barely even present in the mix at all. I mean, I never skip it, but it's not really that notable in addition. Depending on which version you have, next could be EDM The Black Hole Mix, a thick mix of banging break beats and intense lo-fi synth bass pads, maybe a soul singer or a news announcer way in the background too. Does create some pretty neat menacing effect and is a solid enough cut out of context, though gonna be brutally honest, I've been used to the original version of this album which doesn't include it at all and instead skips right into Thursday's Keeper. EDM does make for a nice bridge and lead up between its surrounding tracks, though as I've listened to this particular version of the album more in preparation for this review, the less I feel like it was a necessary addition. I kinda like just going from the super simple drum beats of 111, not really having your attention grabbed, and then Thursday's Keeper comes in to like just absolutely freaking wallop you in the face. Yeah, Thursday's Keeper is the most bizarre and off-the-wall cut on an already strange-sounding album. You got all these abrasive squirting noises, banging beats, revving bass, DJ cuts, various different horn players, including one that I think they use at horse races or something, other yelling samples, abrasive synth licks, even a few amen breaks in there for good measure. This track is pretty damn kick-ass, though I do feel like its impact is somewhat muted when you have EDM as its lead up. If you have EDM in there, it's not as much of an out-of-left-field jolt, but yeah, whatever. Now on Spotify, this is where the album ends. And I suppose closing with a mindfuck like that isn't the worst possible way to go out. But I think the album's original ending, Terminus, is a lot more satisfying. An 11-minute opus featuring guitars from Robert Fripp. I think this got taken off because of another thrash lawsuit, since I think this track also came from the FFWD sessions I mentioned before. Weston isn't credited on it. His contributions may have been there before, but removed after the fact for all I know. Kinda like the Demigod-y thing. But still, this track is like an Orbis Terrarium level ambient opus. Lots of field recordings going up against electronic effects that also sound like they could be alien field recordings. Lots of peaceful ambient pads, slow building beats, pretty memorable little lead melody in there. Do, 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 do. Also, Fripp's like nice low-key guitar work. It's the most soothing and spacey cut in the bunch and makes for the perfect climactic closer to this album. There are legit no bad tracks on this thing in my eyes. Why again did this get such terrible reviews? I mean, I suppose it isn't the most stylistically cohesive project in the Orb catalog, and the much more lighthearted and occasionally poppy flares are, I get it, they're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But for me, every part does still really work together and flow really well. I've never had a listen of this project where I wasn't enthralled by what I was hearing from start to finish. The joke tracks land in their absurdity, the pop cuts all have great hooks and atmosphere, the experimental cuts sound really strange and out there, the ambient cuts are almost like something out of a fairy tale, whether they include vocals or not. And somehow it all feels like one complete experience that isn't quite like any other Orb album before or since. I won't begrudge anyone who was legitimately let down by this back in the day, but I seriously think this one's reception deserves to be turned around. I don't care what anyone says. Cydonia is one of my favorite Orb albums and always has been. I'm overall feeling an 8.7 out of 10 on it. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.